how do we get there? We are also recording this session, which I think you get a lovely notification on. So what this is I've been working on this whole question of bringing behavioral design a little bit more into the learning and development sphere. And as part of that, we have some tools that we're pulling over from behavioral science. And I would say when I do workshops in this, one of the most common things that I tend to hear from people as a behavior that they would really like to see is they want more self-directed learners. And I think that's an excellent behavior to talk about. And it's got all sorts of complicated reasons why it's happening or not happening well right now. But I thought it would be really interesting to talk to Catherine. So Catherine Lombardozzi is, I don't know, are you the acknowledged expert on self-directed learning?
I'm
You're
not
one
quite
of
sure
them.
I'm the acknowledged expert. I just read a book that says never call yourself an expert, but I've certainly read a lot of material in that. And I wrote a booklet on it. So
Yeah. And so I knew about this because you did the research report for the Learning Guild, which we can dig that link up. I think you've your links on the final page, so we'll make
yes,
that link available if people want to take a look at the research report. I think you need a free membership to the Guild to access those, but you should have one of
correct.
those anyway because the research
Because it's a
reports
good
are all
idea.
really good, useful things. Uh, so what we're going to do today is basically take this topic area and hone in on it a little bit with this sort of behavioral focus. And we're not going to obviously cover the length and breadth of the topic, but we can zoom in on a couple of key behaviors and take a look at them from a behavioral design point of view. So, Catherine, I'll make this bigger um, so people can see it, but do you want to talk a little bit about like what your framework or your thought process is around how you start conceiving of the behaviors that are associated with self-directed learning? Because I think one of the challenges is often that like we think we have an image in our head of what that looks like, but when we actually start to get specific about it, it's kind of important to say, okay, what is somebody actually doing if they're a self-directed learner?
Mhm. Yeah, and that was the purpose of the report that I wrote for Learning Guild was to, first of all, identify what exactly we mean when we say self-directed learning. What are we talking about? What are people doing? Ask what makes them successful. So what does the research show about the characteristics of people or the kinds of environments that allow self-directed learning to flourish? And then what can organizations do to support self-directed learning? That was the whole drive. Those were the driving questions behind the report. And in the end, it doesn't look like this. This is my version of it, but basically there were four things that people do when they self-direct their own learning. They identify their own learning needs. They make a plan of one kind or another to work through certain activities or materials in order to learn whatever it is that they want to learn. Then they implement that plan, go ahead out and, watch the videos, read the books, talk to the people, whatever it is that they decided to do. And then at varying points along the way, they will take a pause to say, am I learning what I wanted to learn? Is this making any difference? Am I on the right track? Is my knowledge level and skill level changing in the ways that I wanted it to? And if not, what do I need to change about how I'm learning this process, learning this topic in order to achieve the goals that I had? So that's what I call orientating, wayfinding, journeying, and then the waypoint in between journeying and continuing to reorient oneself around the topic. So that was the process of self-directed learning.
Right, which all completely makes sense because I think it's like we just want people to take initiative, or we just want people to not have to be hounded into finishing, their training courses or whatever the thing is, or that we want people to look up answers or resources. Like there's all these kinds of things. And so being really kind of specific about it and what does it look like, I think is really useful. So you have some actual behaviors kind of sitting underneath these on this slide. If you had to pick, what would be your really like, oh man, this totally doesn't work if they don't do these things, or like these are probably the most crucial items um on the list. And I'm curious, I'm happy to see what people have to say in the chat too. What, like, if you could just chain, anybody in the chat who's dealing with this issue, because presumably you're kind of interested in this if you're here. what would you really love it if your learners would just do to be more self-directed? So I'm curious what behaviors you say, but also Catherine, from your point of view, what are the really big ones? What are, if you had to pick like a top three, what would it be?
Top 3. Well, I think that the biggest one is making a real plan. People don't they sort of have this vague notion of what it is that they want to learn, and so they Google it. And that's their plan, to go ahead and try to learn something. So I think that the biggest um, advancement people can make in their ability to direct their own learning is to take the time to make a plan for it,
Hmm.
which involves a lot of different things. And that's all in some of the materials that I've developed since then. But it's all about how do you pull that together, and then actually implementing the plan is where people stumble. I've worked with people to get beautiful plans put together, and a month and a half later, they haven't moved on any one of them,
Hmm.
any one of the items on the plan. So actually doing the work is also a stumbling block along the way.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think there's the recognizing the need for it. That maybe that's is that where you're kind of have as experience trigger here?
Yes,
Um,
right. Yeah, it's recognizing you don't have a skill, or you don't have the strength in a skill area that's really important to you, or you just become aware of something that is interesting to you and decide you want to learn more about it. So yeah, those are the triggers.
okay. So I think we've got, that I think that kind of is is three items. I'm looking at the stuff in the chat. Yeah, Jessica, this session is being recorded. Um, Initiative to learn plan, self-discipline, critical thinking and reflection. Um, okay. Yeah, Natalie's talking about an educator and faculty developer, and faculty complain a lot about students who want to do the shortcuts. Yeah, that one's a super interesting one, actually. Um, uh,
Yeah, and AI is a big shortcut these days, which is
mhm.
in some ways problematic.
Yeah, connecting the training to enhance our own intrinsic motivation, seeking resources, yeah. So when we start to get into these, it starts to get really interesting because there's a lot of behaviors that are associated with this. This isn't just a single like, hey, people are going to do a better job of like looking stuff up. Um, so for the ones that you've got, I'm gonna take this out of presentation mode so we can write these down. So experience trigger, which is basically, sorry, is that experience as a verb or an adjective? Are they
It's a verb.
experiencing? Okay. So they're experiencing a trigger. They're uh, recognizing a need, a learning need. Is that a fair
Yes.
way to describe that? Okay, cool. Um, and then making a plan. Uh, is that how elaborate when you're talking about the behavior of making a plan? Like, what does that usually look like from
It has a lot of elements to it. I think that's what the thing is that people don't do. They don't sit down and say, what are all the different kinds of resources I can find that will help me to support this learning? They just look for the easy things and the first available things. So making a plan is the act of taking a step back for a minute, and looking for a lot of resources, and then from among those resources selecting the ones that you're actually going to do, rather than just do whatever comes up first, or what's ever closest or shortest.
so this includes looking for resources
Yep.
and
Vetting them. Yeah.
selecting or vetting those resources. Okay. And then you were sort of just talking about follow through, like
Yeah.
uh, continuing, actually working the plan, I guess it is. Yeah, and that's an interesting one because at a certain point I think there's a lot to break down there too. So let's talk about the main tool that we were going to use today to look at this. When we're doing this, one of the things which I'm not going to get into the details today because obviously we're talking about general audiences as opposed to a specific audience. Um, uh, uh, the but when you're dealing with a specific audience, one of the things that can be helpful is to have a real like clear behavioral statement. This is something that I learned about from Dustin D. Tomaso, who's one of my kind of favorite people when it comes to digital behavior change interventions. And so when they're defining a project, they always do this behavioral statement, which is like, who is it? What's the target behavior? To what extent, like, what's the engagement pattern? Is it like amount, frequency, intensity, duration, like specifying all of those kinds of things in what context, and then for what outcome to occur. So what's the goal of or the thing that'll change if people do this. Um, I don't want to get into these all today, but I did just want to mention that, like, if we were doing this, like the full version for real, the long version of
Mm.
these, we would want to get to that kind of level of detail. So specifically something like a plan, you know, um, at a certain point, it's an interesting question to me. I was going to ask you about that one. At a certain point, like if we're overly prescriptive about exactly what the plan looks like, at what point does it not become self-directed anymore? But
They're filling in a lot of blanks in a plan, you
mhm,
know. There's just some it's a, sort of a inner it's in the middle between letting them just do whatever they wanna do and giving them some guidance about the kinds of things they should be looking for and
mhm,
how to get there. There's a lot of chat about that in the chat box about people don't know quite where to look. There's way too many things that could be there, so vetting them and figuring out which ones is actually problematic, and there's lots of things organizations can do to support that, to help people with making a plan. And I think that's what the COM-B will help people to target, to figure out where is the breakdown here? Why is this a excuse me, why is this a problem?
mhm. Yeah. And that's a beautiful segue. I'll mention the ComB piece right now. People who've seen me talk about this before may already be familiar with this. This is not my model. This is Susan Mickey and her team at University College London. Created something called the behavior change wheel, and kind of one of the fundamental parts of the behavior change wheel is ComB analysis. And it at the top level, it's actually a pretty simple formula. Is the person capable of doing the thing? Do they have the knowledge and the ability to do it? Does the person have the opportunity to do the thing, which is, does the social or physical or system support the behavior? And then are they motivated to do the behavior? And are they motivated in a way that it actually like cuts through? Because I'm motivated about a lot of stuff, but I'm not motivated enough about some of them. The way I usually describe that one is we all have like 37 different things we're supposed to be doing at any given moment during it, any day. And it's not enough to go into the list at slot 36 if you're not in the top 3 to 5. I don't know. Anybody else had that experience where they're like, yes, I have a lovely to-do list, and there's several things on that to-do list that seem to never make it up to the actual point where I do them. I think there's like to-do list attrition where eventually I just have to acknowledge that I'm not going to do some of these things and let them go. But uh, my chat has decided to stop scrolling, so I'm every day to-do list attrition. Yeah. Um, so we're going to take a look at some of these behaviors and kind of run them through a very light touch on the ComB. And the ComB, actually, each of these breaks out into two separate categories. Um, the first one is physical capability, which honestly, in most of the knowledge worker stuff that I'm dealing with, is not a big issue. If it's something where there is a physical aspect to it. So, for example, if, for example, if it's exercise, there's going to be a physical capability aspect to it. I can't expect somebody to, run a mile if they literally can't. Or, certain tasks. So if nurses need to turn patients to prevent pressure ulcers in, hospital settings, they need to have the physical ability to be able to, execute on those kinds of things. But I think on most of these, we're not super concerned about physical capability. Psychological capability, though, is an issue. Do
Very
people have,
much.
yeah, do people have the psychological capability? Do they have the knowledge? And there's also like an issue of sort of psychological stamina. Um, if the task is staying focused to identify errors in a system or something like that, you have to be somebody who can like keep that laser focus on things for, an 8-hour day potentially or something like that. And so psychological capability is not only knowledge or ability, it's also just where, like, do I have the psychological stamina for a particular task? Social opportunity gets to things like, does my social environment support the behavior? Do I have, you know, um, do I have role models that are modeling the behavior for me so I can see what it looks like when it's done well? Those kinds of things. Physical opportunities, everything to do with the systems. So it says physical, but it really means like it could be the computer. Does the computer system support it? But it's also stuff like, do people have enough time? Right? Is there room built into the system for people to work on these kinds of things? It could be, do they have access to the resources that they need? Is the system where they're looking up these resources super complicated? Um, and then the motivations. So reflective motivation is motivation people can reflect on or talk about. So what are my goals for self-directed learning? Do I have goals for self-directed learning? Do I see it as part of it goes to things like values and identity. Is it something that I value? Is it something that is part of my identity? I would say, as somebody who's a learning designer, my ability to learn about new things is absolutely part of my professional identity, but not everybody has that or feels that way necessarily, or can talk about it in those terms. And then automatic motivation is all the stuff that kind of runs a little bit below, at or below the level of conscious control. So it's our habits, it's our biases, it's all of those, it's the things that we do without necessarily thinking about it a whole lot, but that have a big impact on our behavior. So that is my short version of what these categories are. So if we take the first behavior we talked about, experience, trigger, so basically recognizing a learning need. So let's drop this in here. Um, is there a physical capability component to that you know of?
No.
No, probably not. Yeah, so we'll just NA that one. But tell me about what you sort of see as the psychological capability that people need to have. What do they need to know or be able to do? It's like,
Well, part of it is self-awareness.
mhm,
So people are sometimes unaware of skills they don't have or think they have more skill or are better at things than they are. So helping people to see what their learning needs are can be part of motivating or getting people to engage in more in learning in a particular area.
right. So we really need to ensure that they're kind of sharpening their eye for um, recognizing when they are missing a knowledge skill piece of the puzzle. Is that a fair
Right.
way to put it?
And it goes toward the going toward the setting the goals part of that first section of the orientating section. It's also about clearly defining that, right? So what do you want to know?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, gosh, I need to be able to manage conflict better. It's what is it about conflict that I need to do differently or better, that getting into the nuance of that, I think is part of the way that you need to analyze your learning goals before you can start to find resources to address the need. Otherwise, you're going to start looking at stuff that's not helpful to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, sometimes this might be fairly obvious, but other times it's probably way murkier. Like, if I don't know how to change my furnace filter, I go out to YouTube and I Google, the furnace filter, for my furnace, or I go out to the website. Like, that's a pretty clear one. Like, I know the knowledge that I'm missing is that not knowing how to, as it happens, I do know how to change my furnace filter, but theoretically, let's say I get a new furnace and I don't know how to change the filter. Like, that's something where it's got a nice kind of tangible component. But you were talking about, I'm sorry, were you just talking about negotiation or conflict resolution or
Yeah,
something?
conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if you are having a lot of conflict on your team, by the way, thank you, Madison, for the mention of Dunning-Kruger, which obviously, shows up here where people maybe are, uh, you know, have sometimes overestimate their skills in an environment. I'm listening to Charles Duhigg's new book, the on super communicators, and I'm like, I'm a good communicator. I am, I'm sitting there thinking, but I'm also kind of like, as I'm listening to him talk about, all the different things that are involved in it, I'm like, am I actually good at that piece? Am I good at that piece? Those kinds of things. Um, so that is a psychological capability of being able to recognize when they're missing knowledge or skills. How uh how do you help people with that, or what have you seen that actually works? We're sort of jumping ahead to solutions a little bit, but um we're not gonna get all the way through to a fully designed solution set, although you have these things, but
I do. Yeah, I've got lots of help for these kinds of things. I think there are a number of ways that organizations start to address this. They give people better tools for analyzing their own capabilities. So having some sort of competency list or review against certain kinds of skills that they want, and giving people feedback on their skills helps to raise their level of awareness of the things that they might want to develop if they want to be more effective in their ongoing role, or
mhm,
might want to develop if they want to move into a new role. So a
mhm,
lot of this is conversation with a leader or with some sort of feedback provider who can help you to see what you can't see.
okay. Yeah, so in something where these are like core job skills that are attached to your job description, or if there's a competency model for your job or something, you could actually kind of like work through the list and sort of
Mhm.
say, where are you with this? Where are you, where am I with it? Or I can ask myself the question, where am I with this kind of thing? Which is at least gives you something to kind of work from, as opposed to
Right.
recognizing kind of on the fly that you're missing, you're missing
And
some.
yeah, and what you just said about the book that you're currently reading plays as well, right? So you can tell people, and I hear this from people all the time, you need to be a better strategic thinker. You need to be a better communicator. Those words don't have meaning.
Hmm.
They're too big. So where do you even begin to dig into that? So giving people the tools that they need to parse those skills apart so that they themselves can say, like you were saying, I think I do these things well, but boy, I never thought about this. And that's not something I take into consideration when I engage in this kind of activity. So giving people ways to analyze the skills that are important to them is useful as well, whether that's a behavior scale, or it's simply a list of descriptors that
Hmm.
says these are the kinds of things that you should be doing. People can work from that as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I I like what Lavinia is saying about
I agree.
communities, because you can, which segues us nicely into the social opportunity. Like, it's one thing to be like, I think I'm a good communicator, and then you're in a room with somebody who's like just crushing it, and you're like, oh, I see what they're doing there. In the Charles Duhigg book, he's doing a whole thing about like how communication happened in a jury room, and I think it's based on some research people did about how juries make decisions and things like that. And I've only been on a jury that went all the way through once, but I wound up being the jury foreperson, because when you facilitate for a living, you wind up getting nominated for the stuff. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, I should, yeah, that thing that they're doing there, I probably should have done that. I've only done it once. I figure I've still got room to get better at that. But the social opportunity of one of the things you can do there is make opportunities for, to see how other people are doing it, so you can kind of level set yourself a little bit.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and that's what the communities piece that Lavinia shares is an important part of that, I think. Getting people and telling self-directed learning stories in an organization can help people to see what they might need to know, or telling people stories about the skills you want them to develop. So to demonstrate certain kinds of skills
mhm,
because other people in the area are doing it is another way to look at this. One of the things that I think might be helpful to mention here is there's a difference between looking at each of these things in terms of getting them to be self-directed at the nuance level, and then the general self-direction. Like I could run this list on, are people or can people be self-directed general,
mhm, Right.
and without digging into the deeper individual behaviors, I can say doing self-directed learning as a practice, as a thing, could be envisioned to go through this list. And that's where you get into some of what people are saying in chat, where, Taruna says, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, it has to be seen as work, and only if it's part of the competency mix that you are, quote, self-directed. What does that mean? What does that look like? I think you need those individual behaviors in order to measure that, but you can look at self-direction at a high level and run this list as well. And that's where you'll get into, do they have the wherewithal, which is a catch-all term that I used in my report to describe what they need to have in order to be self-directed, et cetera. So there's a number of different ways of looking at this. And I like looking at it at the nuance level because you get more concrete advice out of something like this.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question, because obviously if there's a list or something, whether it's competencies attached to a role or whatever it is, or, something, then you've at least got something to react to. But there's also, like, I think much more of this sort of recognizing in the moment that something's not quite there. Like I I don't have a competency list attached to my job. I'm self-employed. I make my own competencies as I go. But one of the things I've been realizing lately is, like, I need to work on this whole negotiation thing. Every time I have to price a proposal, it just, like, there's a little anxiety spiral that happens and things like that. And if I were better at this, I think I could, at least move past this. Or, have, a process that I, work from, or things like that. And that's, I've been self-employed doing pricing for proposals for, I think, 14 years. And, the fact that this is still a competency area that is causing me, a certain amount of issues, whatever. I will be vague about it, but is an interesting one, because despite the fact that I feel like I'm a really good self-directed learner, and I have sought out resources over the years about how do you do this kind of stuff, clearly there's still some way to go on it. And so that whole oh, thanks, Rebecca, for the reference. I'll take a look at that. Um, uh, uh, but there's always going to be, kind of on the fly stuff. And so that being able to recognize a gap when it's a defined, thing that you're sort of able to hold yourself up against, versus that it's a little bit fuzzier than that, or it's a little harder, or it's more, in the flow of work, or it's more on the fly, or, things like that. I don't know. I don't think we want to get into it today, but it's almost like that might need a separate combi, like being able to kind of recognize a gap when you have a stated a stated standard to work from, versus being able to recognize a gap kind of in a, you know a little more on the fly, a little bit more in the flow of work, something like that, where there is no, basically any time when there is no um stated competency or performance that you're evaluating against. Like, those two actually feel kind of different to me.
Yeah, I agree. And with regard to physical opportunity, the other things that I would put into that category is are they given the time to self-reflect, right? If you're working at 120% of capacity all the time, your ability to see a trigger or respond to a trigger is very, very limited.
Mhm.
So I think that's an issue. Um, and the idea of is there some sort of competency list or rubric? That's sort of the resources that people need to experience a trigger. And that's the other area that I think people can be, organizations can better support learners, is by giving them those kinds of things rather than assuming they can find them.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, physical opportunity, like, I guess what's the source of the resources?
Say again?
Resource, where are they finding these learning resources? Is it something where, like, there's a set of kind of pre-approved, whether it's
Right.
a content library or whether it's material that's already been vetted, versus are we just hitting the Google and, um, you know,
Right.
uh,
And organizations give people course catalogs and resource catalogs that's part of a lot of learning strategies, right? You can have the Skillsoft catalog, or we're going to give you licenses to LinkedIn, or we're going to get Harvard Mentor, or something like that that has a lot of articles, right? So we give people all those resources, but with related to a specific thing that they might want to develop, it may be harder to find. And if they search and their search returns 100 options, that's also problematic, because they don't have time to vet 100 options. They want somebody in learning and development to say, if you're looking at project management skills, here are the sets of skills that we think you need to have. And if you need to learn this part of project management, then this is the resource that we recommend that you pursue, or these are the resources that we recommend. So all of that. So curation is different than just giving people a bunch of resources. That is a narrower subset of what they might find if they Googled it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I have a list of book marketing resources. Whenever anybody asks me about book publishing, I'm like, oh
Mm.
gosh, let me send you this, because you try to Google book marketing and the SEO is completely utterly hacked with
Right.
write an
Yeah.
ebook, make $1 million. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I have some good ones that I've found over the years, but you're never going to just like find these by searching for them, you know? So like having a trusted resource who can curate some decent resources for you and things like that. Yeah, I think that's a big, yeah, at least
And
prototype your book and
that's going
be
to
ready to
apply
go.
to more of the behaviors in the longer list than just recognizing the learning need,
Hmm.
right? So there's this, this narrow subset of the resources that are curated that help them to recognize what they need to learn. And if you look at what do they need to plan, or some of those other things on the list, the curated resources have different things in it that would address those needs.
Yeah, and that's getting a little bit ahead, but it is part, I think it does become part of that kind of loop of recognizing. Like if you've seen this stuff go by, you're more likely to be able to identify it as a trigger. So
Mhm.
I'm doing a post hoc rationalization of putting it on here, even though I think we are
Yeah.
getting ahead to a different resource.
Mhm.
Um, so let's talk about motivation a little bit. I mean, social opportunity, it's good examples, it's role modeling. Is the behavior supported? Like if you, for example, is the behaviors, because there could be scenarios where admitting you don't know something is not a safe thing to do. There's all the Amy Edmondson stuff on psychological safety, and I think admitting you don't know something could actually be kind of a fraught. um uh,
Absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Admit you don't know, or like if you're in a very, yeah, if you're in a very competitive environment, admitting that you've got a, kind of a weak point is potentially, yeah, it's potentially a fraught thing.
Right. And you'll do everything you can to deny it.
Hmm. Right, which I'm sure is, not, oh, I think that one's probably a little bit of a hindrance towards being a good self-directed learner if you really need to pretend you know everything already. So
Mhm.
um yeah, let's talk about motivation. So the motivation to recognize a learning need, is this, with reflective motivation, that's motivation that people are kind of already aware of, or it's already a goal that they have, or it's something that they tie into identity or values. What kinds of issues have you seen in that space?
Well, I do think that the psychological safety part is important here.
Hmm.
So, they need to be motivated to look for learning needs and to actively be trying to work them. If they are worried about admitting that they don't know something, they're not going to be motivated to go find those things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I do think that there's a psychological safety issue there.
Hmm.
And I think the other issue is whether or not it is valued for people to be actively doing this on a regular basis. There's some real nuances to culture. I think that's come up in our chat as well. There's some real nuances to culture that give indicators to people about whether or not learning is supported. And so they're not going to be motivated to try to figure out their learning needs if there's no room for learning, or learning is denigrated, or learning is something you do on your own time and we don't worry about that here. You just get your work done, right? So there's all of those kinds of cultural uh, blockers that stop people from being motivated to pursue their own learning needs.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure that there are, managers out there where if their employees like, I would get this done, except I really need to like learn more about this first, might
Mhm.
not react incredibly well to that. So, there's some issues around what is good if good performance is always being productive, is always getting stuff done, like self-directed learning is an investment in kind of future productivity rather than necessarily kind of immediate productivity, or I'm not
Yeah.
sure exactly what I'm trying to say there, but
And one of the things that I think leaders can do to support the motivation to learn, especially in support experiencing trigger, is at the beginning of all new projects to ask people to identify, what do you hope to learn from this project?
ooh,
What
okay.
are you going to take away from it? So
Yep.
that is sort of a call to identify your learning needs, which I think can be really useful in getting the motivation stoked up. That gives people the indication that the organization values that they're learning while they're working,
Mhm.
expects them to be learning while they're working, and that supports motivation.
Right.
Absolutely. And
Right.
you put it under social opportunity, but so I think those are in both places. Absolutely.
Yep. Hmm. Leaders modeling. Yeah. So obviously my notes are a little haphazard given their space
Mhm.
constraints, but I can make this box bigger though. I can do this. I have I have the capability of giving us a little more room. Um yeah, and I think um there are jobs where the expectation around learning is different depending on, circumstances, right? Um, and I think it's hard to talk about that in general because I do think that's going to be specific to the organization. But what's the, I guess it's like what's the language around learning?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard people being told, "You're not paid to think, you're paid to just get it done." So
Right,
that's not a learning environment.
right, right, right.
But then
Yeah.
there are other things where there's a clear expectation that you're gonna be on the leading edge, that you're going to be maintaining expertise, all of those kinds of things. If you're a scientist, if you're,
Mhm.
certain kinds of knowledge workers, it is absolutely expected that you are constantly keeping yourself up to date on the next things. And again, that's where the triggers come in, right? Every learning person on the planet has been triggered by AI, right? You're just like, whoa, what do I need to know about this?
Yeah, yeah,
Do I
yeah.
need to know? What do I need to know? Where can I mean, that's just there's an agita about that all over the place. You don't have to go very far to find it. But there are other jobs where people just don't see that.
Yeah.
They're hired to do a specific thing, and they're not really encouraged to experiment or to be exploring the field or anything like that.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. And uh the so the there's like the big, like the capital L learning, and then there's kind of the small L learning, I think, in organizations. You know, uh I one of the things I notice a lot in organizations is learned helplessness, right? If I go into an organization and they want me to do a design thing and I'm like, well, here's some ideas about this and here's some ideas about this and let's talk about how you could use this, and I constantly hear like, oh, IT won't let us do that, we tried it before and managers didn't support it, or we did this and it didn't work, or da 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 da. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm sorry guys, you have real issues with a certain amount of learned helplessness around this. And I can I can try to help you with that, but honestly, the thing that usually fixes learned helplessness is not one but multiple experiences of it to the contrary. So, having positive experiences with a thing, to undo past experience. If the organization has a lot of that, then how do you give people the positive experiences of it as opposed to the negative experiences, which I think may,
Yeah. I
yeah.
think too, we have a lot of learned helplessness around learning in general, right? Most of us came up in an educational environment where our goals were defined for us, our activities were defined for us.
Mm,
We just did what we were told and we learned what we were supposed to learn. We go into a corporate environment and the corporation does the same thing. They define training programs for us and they put us in these programs to make sure that we learn certain things. And so there's a learned helplessness around how am I supposed to do that for myself? What do you mean I'm supposed to do that for myself? Aren't you supposed to give me a mentoring program? Aren't you supposed to give me a training program? Aren't you supposed to, give me everything that I need to learn and give me the path and give me the directions? That's learned helplessness. We can all do that for ourselves. It with a little bit of wherewithal, go back to that word, with a little bit of knowledge about how to go about doing it, we can all do that for ourselves, but we just don't. We've got no experience in it as adults, and that's unfortunate.
yeah, unless you went to like Montessori or something, I think
Right,
they
right. And I
do.
think schools are getting better these days
Hmm.
at helping people. For example, just in the whole internet search role, I never learned internet search in school because there was no such thing in school, right? When
Right,
I
right,
was in
right.
school, I had to learn that, way after the fact. But my nieces and nephews are learning internet research and how to vet resources and how to tell good material from bad material. That's part of their schooling. And yay, then that's fantastic. But we're still, I think going to have the challenge of people feeling like they need to be directed and they haven't learned how to completely manage their own process, including experiencing it, figuring out what their goals are.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting one for me because I do think there's something there that we may want to look at too when we're dealing with like beginner level versus advanced topics.
Mhm.
Because the ability to, and it goes to the Dunning-Kruger and it goes to all of this kind of stuff, the ability to recognize a gap is and then the ability to like vet resources and all of those kinds of things. A lot of that has to do with how sophisticated are you about this topic to begin with, right? Um,
Very true.
so, if you don't know what you don't know, you can't, you often, it's hard to identify the gaps. And it's also, you don't have any kind of context for evaluating the resources when you get to it. So there may be something there around what level, uh, and so again, it's a thing where we're looking a little bit at what level is it, and is it defined, or the two ones, is the competency defined, uh, uh, you know, as being two cases. And at a certain point, like I said, you may actually have to split these into separate combi analysis because there's enough different about them to, like if you're dealing with an expert audience who can evaluate, has enough expertise to evaluate some of these kinds of things, you've got a different set of capabilities and you've got a different set of motivations. But if you're dealing with a beginner audience who may or may not have any context for being able to evaluate this, then that is going to lean more on capability at that point, right? So
Right. Yeah. When I talk to self-directed learners, when I talk to people who want to get better at this, um, one of the things we talk about that is that if you are brand new to this subject area, you probably do need to start with some sort of formal learning thing,
mhm.
something that really lays the foundations. Unless if you really like to read thick books on a subject, that's a good place to start too. But many people would prefer to go into a course that just give them the basics so they know the language, they know additional questions that they should ask, etc. Whereas when you are an experienced person, you probably have little patience for training.
Right,
You want
right.
you want to go right to, let me talk to some additional experts, let me try to find a community of people, that can help me to understand this better, because you already have the language and the experience to know what it is you're looking for and what's going to be really helpful to you.
Hmm. Yeah. So we can talk about this experience trigger recognizing a learning need in a general capacity, but if we really wanted to start serving the audience, we'd need to kind of look at these other characteristics too. Is this a learner that has any kind of expertise that they can use to do their own vetting or their own, evaluation, both of their abilities, but also of resources when we get to, that's vetting resources is something we identified as behavior that really is making its way into this combi but into this behavior, but it really is a future behavior.
Yes.
And then is the competency defined? Is it something that we can is it something that they can like say, oh, do I have, they can actually ask the question. And I mentioned somewhere in here, I think I dropped in a competency list or rubric. Sometimes it is about a rubric, right? Like, that can be a useful tool for some of these competencies. Like I do it like this, or I do it like this, or I do it like this, and not necessarily, you think you're in the mid range, but really you're kind of at the beginning level, and something. And that's where maybe comparing against peers or seeing how other people do it, or lots of things. Okay.
Yeah.
Any, anything else that you feel like sits into the automatic motivation? I mean, I think there's like something there about just even that, like, actively looking for it is a thing, as opposed to just sort of accepting stuff as it comes. There's something in that automatic space of, you know, like, because I mean, interrupting existing habits is a really difficult thing to get people to do. So that sort of stopping and asking the question of, do I have everything I need here? Things like that.
Yeah, funnily enough, just before we got on this call, I hit send on my April newsletter, which is on the habits of lifelong learning,
Mhm.
So, yeah, developing habits that make that urge you, that incite you to think about these things on a regular basis is important, right? So what are the habits that you have of defining your learning needs? Do do they just come haphazardly, or do you have specific points in time where you ask yourself to sit down and say, what do I want to learn? Is it your development planning process in your organization? Is it the beginning of the new year where you want to sit down and write your goals? So having a habit of sitting down and evaluating where you are and where you want to be is critical to get this to happen on a
Mhm.
regular basis, if that makes sense. So you're not just relying on a failure point, for example, although that's certainly a good trigger, but you're not just relying on failure points to tell you where you need to go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things I've noticed about my personal relationship with procrastination, is that often I I think sometimes some tasks you procrastinate about because they're just not that fun. Like I'm still dealing with taxes on, what is it, April 4th. So, like that's, I know how to do that stuff. I just don't want to deal with it. But other things that I find, the other things I procrastinate about are usually things where I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to do it. And I know once I get into it, I'll figure it out, but it's still, you can keep kicking that uncertainty down the road a little bit. And so I think there's some interesting automatic motivation there, right? If this is pinging stuff where you feel uncertain, or you feel, a little bit ill-prepared or a little bit vague, or whatever, it's probably really easy to just kind of like push it aside for a little longer, or push it aside for a little longer. And so, like actively recognizing and doing something about that, is an interesting stuff. And I think there's also, like, one of the things that I've realized about designing learning for other people is I am like stupid giddy happy when I get to learn new interesting things, and I don't care that much about what they are. Like I'm like, oh, how does, the process for evaluating disability claims work? Sure, I get to learn about that today. Like it's paperwork and all this kind of stuff, but like how does it actually work? I'm always interested. But not everybody feels that way, so not projecting my feelings about learning is a fun thing, always as onto other people, and making sure that I understand what their perspective of that is. Your learners are not you. Absolutely, Madison. 100%. Big flashing lights. So, yep. Um, okay. Anything else that sits under the sun? I mean, we've proved that you can spend a solid half hour just, kind
Just
of
playing
breaking
with
down
that.
one of these
Yeah.
behaviors.
Yeah. And like I said, I do think that for people in organizations who are trying to figure this out, this is a good place to start just by saying self-directed learning, trying to conceptualize this whole self-directed learning activity as the behavior you want, and then
Mhm.
running down this because there's nuances in each of the triggers. And you may make yourself crazy, not in each of the triggers, in each of the behaviors underneath the orientating, wayfinding, etc. But if you look at it as a whole, you can also find some really good places to to um, to work in order to promote it in your organization.
Well, we've got 8 more minutes, and I want to make sure we leave 5 or so minutes for questions. So let's take 2 or 3 minutes and just kind of talk about. We're obviously not going to get all the way into solutions for this stuff, but are there some particular things that you've been doing to support this behavior with the stuff that you're doing, or should we talk about like, you know, some? Should we do a little brainstorming around some strategies to support this?
Yeah, I think that there are some very specific things that come up frequently when I work with people individually and with organizations on self-directed learning. Um, the whole wherewithal question, I think, is an important one. Do employees actually know how to do this? That's come up a lot in the chat. Do you have the wherewithal slide?
I
That
do. Yeah. Let me.
so do they have the skills that they need? It's the one with the person at the desk, number 11.
Thank you. Perfect.
So do they have the motivation to learn? Do they have self-efficacy? That is, do they believe they can learn in this way? Do they have the ability to self-assess? Are they resourceful and able to plan? Those two things go hand in hand. So can they find resources? Can they put together a plan for themselves? All of those are skills that are necessary. And they have to have learning skills. So they have to know how to direct their attention and how to take notes and how to create checklists for themselves based on what they're reading or seeing or observing or whatever it is that they're doing to learn. So I think that's one area that organizations really need to pay attention to is how do you support people's learning to learn in this way. Giving them time is the other really big thing. People whine that that they don't have time for anything. They don't whine. They um,
They very correctly identify
they
an issue that they
yeah,
they
yeah,
they
they're
frequently don't have
yeah,
time for
it's a
things.
right, but what the word whine comes up from leadership, right? They say
Mhm.
their people are whining, and they're not whining. They are
Everybody's busy.
genuinely strapped for time, right? So giving people time is another piece that's really important, and helping people to reinforce why they want to learn something. So when I tell people to define learning goals, the orientating part, it's not just what do you want to learn, but why do you want to learn it?
Hmm.
Because if you don't have a big why, then it's not going to get to the top of the list,
Yeah.
right? It's
Hmm.
just not going to get to the top of the list. It's just a nice to have,
Hmm.
right? So you really have to delve into what's my why and amplify that in some way. Organizations can help people to do that, but individuals can do that for themselves as well.
Yeah, and I sometimes I have mixed feelings when people say I don't have enough time because a lot of times that's the top layer excuse and you need to peel that back a few layers
Yeah.
before you find out the real reasons they're not doing stuff. But I also think it is true in a lot of organizations. Something like self-directed learning, if they tell me they don't have enough time, they're probably right. I mean, we all know about like the Google thing where you get a certain percentage of your time to
Mhm.
learn new things and stuff like that. But if you don't work for a really rich company that builds that in, and I'm sure there's people at Google who also, have a hard time with, other job responsibilities to find time for that. Although I was once I did a lot of ID workshops for them several years back, and I will say that people did, come to the workshop just because they were curious and they could fit it into their their bonus time and things like that. So there was some of both, I'm sure, but yeah, so there's this whole issue around, we didn't even get past the first behavior and we identified a bunch of issues. And I think when we get into this, if it's something that they need to either form the habit around or it's a skill that they need to develop, then you need to figure out how are they going to practice this? How are they going to get feedback? How are they going to recognize like, and interrupt themselves in the flow of work to recognize that, oh, there's a thing here, and a lot of times practice is a good answer to that. So then all of a sudden we're like, all right, how does somebody practice the behavior of recognizing that they've got a skill gap or something like that, and what does that feel like, and how do they you know know to stop and kind of go, wait a minute, like there's a whole slew of things that we didn't even get past,
Yeah,
behavior
and if
one.
you look at people's like development plans, I've looked at development plans in corporations for a lot of years just because I was a manager in corporations. What we tend to get is a lot of study things. I'm going to read a book, I'm going to take a class, I'm going to do what, but we don't get, I'm going to practice it and I'm going to get feedback from so and so, right? So
Yes.
that's part of what I talk about when we talk about self-directed learning is you need to go beyond the inputs to where are the practice opportunities, where are the application opportunities, where are you going to do your reflection or your studying of your notes. You can't just read a book and say, well, that was interesting. You've got to then sit down and say, okay, what does this mean for the way I do this kind of work? What am I going to incorporate it into my modus operandi? What what things am I going to use to make sure I do this when I do my presentation or do my
Mm.
project planning or whatever it is. So yeah, you have to go beyond just the inputs and get social support and practice opportunities and reflection opportunities in there as well.
So we're down to it. I want to make sure we get everybody the contact information. I think Anne is going to drop the links in to
Yeah,
the chat for stuff. Here's Catherine's information. I'm
right.
happy to stick around for a few minutes and address questions because I know we're running
Yes.
right up to the hour.
And
Catherine,
I
I
would
don't.
say that link at the bottom that we're going to put in chat, that maximizing self-directed learning, that will lead you to a page I put together for a workshop I did at a conference. So it's got the links to the book on self-directed learning. It's got some other things in there and a lot of the stuff related to my material on
Okay.
self-directed learning, which are some of it is free. So have at it.
Right. Okay. So we've got that there, and we dropped in the links for my contact information and put that in the chat as well. There's also currently a code for the next few days if people are interested in Talk to the Elephant, which is the book. There's a whole slew of examples about using Combi to analyze different behaviors and things like that. So if that's of interest to people, yeah, I wrote a book about it. And so that material is all in the chat, and there is a discount code on the Peach Pit website. The Peach Pit website works the best if you're in the US, because otherwise there's shipping and customs and things like that. So yeah, like I said, I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes and answer questions. Catherine, I don't know what your availability is
I'm
like for
good.
that. Okay, so we're happy to hang out here and address some questions. I know we're pretty much right at the hour, but thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for all of the useful material in the chat. And yeah, I feel like we could
Thank
talk
you
about
very
this for
much.
like a couple more hours easily. So
Really. I was scrolling to see if we have any questions.
yeah, and did you grab anything? There's okay. There's a question, looks like, from Lee. Oh, presenting at a leadership meeting. Yeah, recognizing that as a development opportunity.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot. I remember when I was in corporation, a learning leader was an individual was put in the learning leader role from a business role, was very upset about that assignment because
Mm,
the leadership team that made that assignment didn't say anything to her about what she hoped she would get out of it. She felt like she was being punished in some way,
oh,
which
yeah.
made me feel great as a learning person. But but so helping people to understand that you give them developmental assignments, what you want them to get out of it, and how they might be able to learn from it. Is, you know, both of those things can be really supportive. You don't have to hold their hand through the whole thing, but just elevating that can be really critical.
Yeah. There's a question from Juan about the difference between self-directed learning and self-regulated learning. I don't know if I distinguish between those, but is that a
There's a great chapter on that in Mirjam, I can't ever
Miriam
say her name.
Nealon's
Yeah, in there
yeah.
in her book on
Evidence-based
yes,
evidence-based learning, something. It's a
evidence-based
Kogan page book.
learning. Yeah.
Yep.
There's a real good chapter on that where she really parses it, but I'm with Julie. There's not a whole lot of difference in my head. But it's and I haven't memorized how she described it, but I was thankful to her for taking the time to try to pull those two concepts apart.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to go look at it myself. I know I have a copy, and I don't remember what the chapter said there. I kind of focused heavily on the skills conversation in that book. That's something Miriam and I talk a lot about. So, what about people who seem to be addicted to learning? Yeah, that's a thing, right? Like attending all the possible webinars, always improving themselves. I see quite a few PhD students.
I
Yeah, I
think
think
that's good.
oh, I have a few days like that. I think that's one of the reasons I'm self-employed, because if I spend a morning pursuing all, 9 YouTube videos about how to do some random risk analysis thing, like nobody can tell me I can't, but ultimately it does need to make its way back into application or, things like that. So how does it come back around? And is it just a delay tactic? I mean, I managed to delay dealing with this book for at least a year and a half, learning about publishing. So
Yeah, and I think that what you want to do with folks like that is put them in a position to translate their learning. So, to be asking questions like, what did you get out of that? What, you know, how can you apply what you learned in that webinar to what we're doing here? How does that support your research, or how does that support your understanding of this project? So helping them to understand that just absorbing doesn't get you very far. You
mhm,
need to actually then think about, where does this go in my knowledge and skill base, and how can I use it? Otherwise, it's not useful. And if you get them to start thinking about that, they may make better choices about what they take in the first place.
mhm. Okay. Yeah, yeah. I admit, one, I've spent more time on the self-directed learning side than the self-regulated, so I'm gonna have to go and, like I said, see what Miriam said about it if she addressed that. So
She did a great job, and I'm
okay.
ashamed of myself that I can't reel off, what the differences are. But I remember reading it and thinking, yeah, okay, that's good,
Yep.
useful.
All
I will
right.
say, when I did the self-directed learning report, there are resources in that report that are on self-regulated learning, not on self-directed learning, because
I
it's
I have
felt
to
close
believe
enough
there's I
to
have to
to
believe
apply them. Yeah.
they're
Um,
overlapping circles.
yeah.
So, um,
See if they
forgive the second question. We're doing SWOT exercises to identify skills gaps, but are uh yeah, I'll if you want to take a do you want to take a pass at the SWOT question, and I'll grab the link to Miriam's book?
I think that SWOT can help you to identify learning needs. I think that is an interesting thing, but you are right in being concerned that when you ask people strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, they are blinded by their own biases and their own understanding of what's going on. So, a way, the only potential way, not the only, but one potential way to mitigate that is to give them something that's more concrete to SWOT against. So rather than just use a general thing, what are our learning skills, or how good are we at consulting with our clients, and having them do a SWOT against that, but just to give them a framework that says, this is what good consulting looks like. Now let's do a SWOT against that. Where are our
Mhm.
strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats related to what these experts have identified as the pinnacle of what good consulting looks like? That may help.
I think there's something too about the collection of case examples, because one of the things I was talking to somebody the other day, and he was talking about, we were talking about communication, like getting better at communicating current status on stuff, and I'm like, well, can you collect transcripts or somehow get a whole slew of communications and then let your subject matter experts tell you what's wrong with them, right? These are good, these are not good, these are missing this, these are missing this, these are missing this. And then you can start to have a much clearer idea of what your real standard that you're operating towards is. Um, when when it's all hypothetical, it can be really hard to, and then you can start to be like, oh, now we have a standard to evaluate against. Now we can look at a status report that somebody writes and say, well, we know we need this, this, and this, and it's only got two of the three, or something like that. So
Mhm.
I think collecting good and bad and case examples and being able to identify what's missing in some of them is a strategy. It's not always feasible, if it's all verbal communication that's happening, in different
And doing that
places.
in a group is useful because everybody's got different perspectives.
Yep. So, all right.
We got the title
Uh,
of the book. I don't see any additional questions just yet.
yeah, I think we're good. Unless anybody's got anything else, I'm gonna go ahead and call it. And thanks everybody for sticking around.
Thank you. It was fun.
And we will stop the recording. I will stop sharing and we will stop the
Thanks,
recording.
Julie. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, wasn't it?
Yeah.